Thanks so much to everybody joining us this evening. Congressman Israel, we are live.
Natalie, thank you very much. Welcome everybody to what I promise you will be just a remarkable hour with Senator Tammy Duckworth. This is part of the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at Cornell University's Book and Author Series. It's sponsored by our great friend Bernard Schwartz. And tonight, a book that I literally could not put down, Senator Duckworth's Every Day is a Gift. We're going to be sending you instructions on how to order the book. If you've already ordered it, you know how special it is. If you haven't ordered it yet, you're missing out on something really special. And before we properly introduce the senator, just 3 housekeeping matters. First, I want to remind everybody that the mission of the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at Cornell is to deepen discourse, raise understanding, provide you with insight much deeper than sound bites and tweets and talking points and punditry. 2 weeks ago, President Clinton joined us to discuss the state of democracy. Our next program is on May 6th at 7 p.m. It's a conversation with Susan Page about what will be her newly released book, Madam Speaker, Nancy Pelosi and the Lessons of Power. That's going to be released on April 20th, and so that it will be topical. Then on May 19th, we'll have a conversation with former New Mexico Governor and Ambassador Bill Richardson about navigating international hostage situations. For information about this, to register, simply Google Cornell University Institute of Politics, and it'll bring you right to our website. Second, I do want to acknowledge some colleagues and former colleagues and friends of Senator Duckworth and mine who are with us tonight. Congressman Dan Maffei, now the chairman of the Federal Maritime Commission, is with us. Congressman Bill Enyart from Illinois, Congressman John Barrow, Congressman Ryan Costello, Congressman Martin Frost, Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman, David Axelrod, former senior advisor to President Obama, David, of course, heads the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago. The county executive of Ulster County, New York, is with us. He is a veteran himself. In addition to that, some special Cornell people. The provost of Cornell is with us, Michael Kutlikoff, and 3 members of our board of trustees, Martin Scheinman, Beth Anderson, and Stephanie Keene-Fox. Third bit of housekeeping, just to kind of lay it out for the next hour or so. We have a hard stop at 8. Chris Riback and I will be in conversation with Senator Duckworth. And then at about 7:40, we'll open it up to questions and answers from the audience. Natalie will give you instructions on that. And now I'm very pleased to call on Wendy Abrams to introduce Senator Duckworth. Wendy is a member of the board of the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at Cornell. She's the founder of Cool Globes, a nonprofit organization that raises awareness about the climate crisis. And she's a constituent of the senators. Wendy, take it away.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. And I'm so happy to introduce Senator Duckworth, who I knew before she was Congresswoman Duckworth. And it's so fun to see you and your career being so successful. But for those of you who don't know Senator Duckworth, she's a former U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel who served as a junior senator from Illinois since 2017, and prior to that was in the House of Representatives from the 8th District in Illinois. She also served as the Assistant Secretary of Public and Intergovernmental Affairs in the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and the Director of the Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs, and just a fantastic woman and somebody I really respect and admire, and so happy to see you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Wendy. That's so kind of you.
All right. Well, let me pose 2 questions to you, Senator, and then we're going to send it over to Chris Riback, our partner in these book and author events. Look, the book is much more than what happened on November 12th of 2004. when your crew was shot down in a Black Hawk. But let's start there for the moment, and then we'll probe the book even deeper. Tell us about that moment. For those who haven't read the book, for those who haven't or aren't aware of what you went through, take us through what happened on that day.
Sure. So it's actually at the middle of the book, and the book is called Every Day is a Gift because that day was when the daily gifts started for me. That day, I had been in country in Iraq about actually 8 months to the day. And we've been deployed for over 10 months. We were getting ready to be towards the end of our tour. I was just out flying a regular day's worth of missions. It was during the second battle for Fallujah. So we started early and we flew all over Iraq, north, south, east, west, and we ended the day in Baghdad. And actually, it was a really good day, Steve. It was just, I mean, I got to fly with a crew that I loved flying with. The pilot in command was a Missouri National Guardsman, very wry sense of humor. In the book, I have some Army aviation humor in there. Don't let your kids read it. You know, we were done with our missions, and I actually had time to stop to get a milkshake and a stir fry made to order in the green zone, which was a nice break from the meals ready to eat out of a bag we usually got to eat. When we got this call on the radio, we need you guys to do a detour. We need you to go over there and pick up some passengers. And it was coming back from that detour that we flew basically over a nest of insurgents who had been flushed out of Fallujah. And they just shot everything they had up into the air. And you know, when you get enough people throwing basketballs at the net on a basketball court, one of them is going to go through nothing but net, right? That's what happened. One of those RPGs literally just came through and landed in my lap and vaporized my right leg and kicked my left leg into the instrument panel of the bird and severed that. It took off the back of my right arm. It left my arm remained attached just with some skin. And then we did everything we could to land the aircraft. I tried to help land the aircraft once we got the bird on the ground. I passed out trying to help do an emergency engine shutdown. And then I don't remember anything else of that day. And in the process of writing this book, I was actually given this gift of getting to find out about all the different parts of the day because I found the doctors and the nurses who took care of me. And then in the book, I really go into detail because you see, my buddies thought I was dead and they thought they were recovering a body to be buried for my family. I didn't get a tourniquet. I didn't get any first aid because they knew I was dead. My pilot in command is a police officer and an EMT in the civilian world. And he said, Tammy, you were just torso. There was no bottom half to your body. I knew you were dead. But I wasn't. And my crew chief, Sergeant Fierce, that's a great name for a sergeant, isn't it? Sergeant Fierce had the presence of mind, even though he almost lost his leg, to realize that the body that had been thrown on top of him, my body, was still bleeding, which meant that my heart was still beating. And in the book, they realized there was more and more blood sloshing on the floor of the aircraft, which is when they went, holy cow, she's still alive. And Chris Fierce actually refused medical help when the medic got to him and pushed him towards me. And that was the beginning of many people moving to save my life. Oh, here's my 6-year-old.
Oh, hi. I read all about you.
So every day is a gift because they gave me the gift of life that day. And every day, you know, I shouldn't be here, but here I am. And I have this beautiful 6-year-old.
This is Abigail, right?
This is Abigail, that Senator Akaka named her, Abigail Okalani.
Hi, Abigail.
She can't hear you.
Oh.
I have my earphones in. So
I see. Okay.
every day since that day has been a gift.
Gift.
And I try to live up to the sacrifices my buddies made to save me.
You talk about your buddies, and I just want to briefly read what I thought was really the most moving passage of many moving passages in the book and ask you to expand on it. You wrote, so you're taken to this combat hospital in Baghdad, and you're asking, you have these catastrophic injuries. They're about to put you under, and you're asking about, how are my guys? How are my guys? And this is what you write. I didn't land the aircraft and I didn't carry anyone on my back. I wasn't a hero that day. But that moment is in the combat support hospital in Baghdad is still my personal proudest moment. Because in the last breath I had before the nurse put me under, which for all anyone knew might be my last breath on earth. I was still trying to take care of my guys. In the rawest, most traumatic moment of my life, my instinct was to check on my men. And if those had been my last words, I'd have been fine with that. Now,
Yeah.
in Congress, 435 rather individualistic people,
Yeah.
many fighting wars against themselves. How the heck did you make a transition from that faith that you had in one another to going to the House of Representatives, where people are just, it's like every person for himself?
Some of the transition is I found other veterans to work with. I found, I mean, on the other side of the aisle, I worked a lot with Paul Cook from California, two-time Purple Heart recipient out of California. He's Republican. Brad Weintraub from Ohio, and he was actually he was a podiatrist, but he was actually the officer in charge of surgery in Baghdad a couple of times. So I found people who understood, who got it, who understood this higher calling than yourself, and I tried to work with them. But I will tell you that it's changed, unfortunately, but I always assume that the other person loved this country as much as I love this country. And if they love this country as much as I love this country, we can find a way to work with each other. I just have to assume that they think the solution to the problems, are different than my solutions, but they have the same intention, which is to serve this nation. I will tell you, unfortunately, that I don't feel that way about President Trump. I don't think he loves this country as much as I love this country. And he would be the one exception, to be honest.
Chris?
Thank you, Steve. And yeah, that certainly came across in some of the things that you commented about President Trump. And you certainly showed some of your Army aviation humor in some of the things that you said in those days. Now, you can understand, Senator, the last thing I want to do, particularly after Steve and you just outlined the level of your bravery and strength and the things that you can do. Last thing I want to do is start this part of the conversation with a conclusion that you disagree with. So, I'm not looking for trouble. I want you to, but I found as compelling, extraordinary as your post-shoot down life is and has been, and you just talked about part of it. I found the preteen Tammy Duckworth, the first half of your story, every bit as compelling and important and educational as your incredible post-shoot down story. I mean, I learned about life and adversity and the power of perseverance that you showed. Is that a fair conclusion? Or have I unwittingly picked a fight with you that I know I'll lose because having read your book, I don't think there's anyone who fights with you and wins. So I'm not getting into that action.
Thank you. I wrote the book because my daughter Abigail had been asking me whether it was worth it, whether, why couldn't somebody's mom or dad have gone off to war and lose their legs? And why did I go through what I did, and whether it was worth it? Because she was just, she was in pre-K at the time, and she wanted a mommy who could join in the three-legged races on field day at school, and I couldn't do it. And I started writing snippets to answer her question, was it worth it? And my answer is yes, absolutely. And that's where the early part of my life for the book came in, was actually me talking. I wanted her to know what it was like for me growing up in Southeast Asia, post-Vietnam, as a biracial, Amerasian kid who was just so grateful that my dad had stayed and married my mom and I wasn't left behind. I wanted her to know what it was like fleeing Cambodia, and what being in a nation that doesn't have the freedoms and the privileges of being an American was like, so that she would understand that it was worth it. And that's where that first half of the book came from. It's just me trying to tell my daughters. And I end the book with a letter to my girls about serving this country. But really that first part was just about, vignettes of why America is worth it, and why every time that I was on my knees and my family was struggling, America didn't give up on us. Yeah, it was a struggle, but there were those things that were there that helped save me along the way.
Now, we just saw Abigail a moment ago. Would she know now why it was worth it, or is it too early for that?
It's too early. It's too early. She's still in the stage where she waits until I get on a call like this to con me into buying a new video game on her iPad, because she knows all it takes is my thumb, because Apple iPay, that's when she queues it up, and she knows that, she comes and she bugs me. I'll just give her my thumb, and I'm just like buying her a new
Excellent. Well,
software.
please
smart.
let Abigail know that we are happy to help, and we hope that she's ringing up, games and apps right now while we're talking. Will you give a sense? You just did it a moment ago. The sense of November 12th, 2004, and after. Give a sense for the folks who haven't read Thailand in the early 70s and throughout there. Country Woods in Indonesia. Cambodia, Singapore, and then Hawaii, where, as far as I can tell, you came within a centimeter, and the insane, ridiculous generosity of a 90-year-old saint from being homeless. Tell us about that part of your life, please.
Yeah, so I grew up as I said, in Southeast Asia post-Vietnam. My dad retired from the Army in 1972. So my dad married my mom, fell in love, and stayed, whereas a lot of American GIs who did not, and then they went home. And so I grew up with the privilege of being an American and understanding that I had this privilege, because I could literally see street kids who looked exactly like me, Amerasian like me, begging on the streets. And my dad went to work for the United Nations refugee programs and development programs. So he moved us around Vietnam, Cambodia, those places, doing humanitarian missions for the United Nations. And so I saw that America was this shining light, that people wanted to deal with Americans, that we were the ones bringing the aid, that we were the ones helping the people who were most desperately in need. I didn't know why, but I knew we were the good guys. But it wasn't because we had won a war. We literally just lost a war to an army in black pajamas, and yet we had this status. And so my dad, from a very early age, taught me the privilege of being an American, because I could literally see kids who did not have that privilege because they were left behind. And so I always knew that my life was on this knife's edge balance. And I did grow up with a lot of anxiety, thinking, well, maybe my dad won't come back. My dad at one point was stationed at Fort Sheridan. I was scared that maybe he wouldn't come back. And all during this time, I had my Asian cousins who would make fun of me for being biracial. So there was a lot of negative stereotyping and prejudice against biracial kids of American servicemen and women. Happens with any war. And
No, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I was in Cambodia until the last commercial flight out. I left on the last commercial flight out. I remember Cambodia, and I tried to put this in the book. I tried to describe the Cambodia that I remember with wide boulevards and crusty French bread and bougainvillea and mango trees, That's what I remember. In the process of writing this book, my mom reminded me that when we left, we were actually crouching on the floor of the airport underneath the window height so that the bullets would fly over our heads and not kill us. And I don't remember that as a kid. I just remember, playing with the very nice soldier who guarded our house. And now when I look at the pictures, the man's carrying, he's carrying an automatic machine gun, that was my playmate. I didn't think about that as a child. So, and then, it gave me a real sense of refugees and what people would do to escape. And so later on, when we dealt with the Syrian refugee crisis, for example, I remember watching the Vietnamese boat people. And I just had Abigail, and I just remember thinking, as a mom of a 6-month-old, how is it that the choice to put your child in a little boat and go to the ocean is the safest thing you can do for your child? What situation are you in that is the best choice you can possibly make? And it affects, my policies to this day.
It certainly is evident that so much of what you lived, experienced, saw affects your policy choices today. And you had periods of childhood that were extremely comfortable. Yes. Country Woods, right, that
Indonesia,
were,
yep.
and in very fine, if not excellent, international schools. And then on a dime, you had what felt like a dime in the
right.
telling, in a book, had periods where when your dad went off to Fort Sheridan and you were aware that, a lot of Army, military, American dads left, and as your own, I guess your mother's family was actually telling you, right, your cousins or your aunt,
Yeah, he's never
that he
coming
was
back.
not going to come back. You went and looked for the rice, and you knew
Yeah.
that if you found the rice in your cupboard, which you did find, then you would find a way. You would be okay. How did you? I mean, the bounds. You're raising children right now of your own. The going from such comfort to such unbelievable lack of comfort to back and forth. How did you manage that?
It was hard. It was hard. I've always been a survivor. And it's funny because I never thought about it in those terms, but writing this book forced me to think about the fact that, oh my gosh, maybe I am a survivor. Now, my staff have always said that if there were a zombie apocalypse, they would want to be with me because they know that I would survive.
Yeah.
And so they actually
You would. I'm certain you would.
Yeah, they actually compete to be like who gets to go with Tammy during the zombie apocalypse, because the people around me would actually survive. And that was, that story about my dad. I mean, that I was probably maybe 4. That was my first instinct when I found out that my dad was going to be stationed away for a year. Was I ran into the kitchen. And if you've ever been in an Asian house, there's a 40-pound bag of rice underneath the kitchen sink. If it's not there, it's not a real Asian house. So that's the first thing I checked was, so there's a full 40-pound bag of rice, we're going to survive. As long as we've got rice, we can survive. That was my first instinct as a 4-year-old. Like I knew, and maybe it's because I had watched my dad delivering bags of rice with the American flag on it to refugee camps or something. But I knew that was for me a sign of survival. And then in Hawaii, we literally were homeless that night when that woman from the American Legion Auxiliary wrote a check that allowed us to put a deposit and the first month's rent on that little cheap motel that we stayed in and kept a roof over our heads. And to this day I thank her because I don't remember her name. I just remember she seemed ancient to me at 15 and she was 90.
Yeah.
But she put a roof over our heads and saved us that one day. So often the stories about people who stepped forward and saved me when I needed help, who didn't give up on me. Or my family when we needed help.
And she
I'm sorry, Chris.
No, please go ahead, Steve. Yeah.
You made a couple of references to your dad. In the book, you talk about having a complicated relationship with him. Can you take us through that?
Yeah, I never thought of it as, again, this is another thing with the process of writing the book, it came through. Sorry, that's the 3-year-old yelling. This is what happens when you're a mom of 2 kids. I apologize. But
for the house, Tammy, it's okay.
Yeah. So I actually was forced to explore my relationship with my dad in writing this book. I wasn't intending to, but it just came through. And I realized that, I had this complicated relationship with my dad, where I was always trying to please him and get his approval, but I just never did. My dad was a tough guy. My dad was young to be a World War II veteran. He was one of these guys who lied at 15 and enlisted. But he was part of that generation that was very quiet, that never talked about their service, that never, hard to please. He grew up during the Great Depression, so he was hungry as a child. He never wanted to talk about it. He was embarrassed and ashamed of it. It's like so much of that generation, and he was determined to rise above it. Writing the book forced me to think about, how everything I did, I often was just trying to get my dad's approval, and it just drove me to work harder and be more. And I never got it until I lost my legs. And then I think by that time he'd mellowed. He was, 76, and he'd mellowed, and maybe he knew the end was near. And he finally told me that, he was proud of me, which I'd never heard my entire life.
No, yeah, that moment, I think it was just a couple of days before he passed away, wasn't it? And you stood up, and that was the time that from your book that he said that to you. And that was hard to read. The early parts of your book and the things that you felt, this line to Steve's point on page 30, he never once said he was proud of me. And that was the one thing I desperately wanted. I wrote a note to myself, that's tough to read, Senator.
It is tough to read, but you know what? I tell my kids that I'm proud of them all the time now because of that. And I don't think my dad was trying to be harsh. I think it was just his way of trying to get me to do more and trying to get me to achieve more. and was to hold that out. He just never said it to me. I tell my daughters this all the time, so much so that one day my 3-year-old looked at me and said, "Mommy, I love you and I'm proud of you." And I thought, okay, maybe I've gone a little overboard, but I'm proud of that. So she actually says it. So I say it to my kids all the time because I don't ever want them to go through what I went through.
It's probably the good direction to err on the side of. Trust me, I'm no parenting expert, but that's probably the right way. So if that was one of the toughest lines to read, and it was very, there were several lines in there that were really kind of hard to read. My favorite line on page 101, and this is why your staff is going to be behind you, and I'm going to be right behind them at the zombie apocalypse. You wrote, "If there's something I really want, and you tell me what I have to do to get it, then I will do that thing. When the only obstacle is effort, then there is no obstacle, because I will move heaven and earth to get what I want, even if I have to do it one pebble at a time." That line, I mean, if there's a line that I will read to my kids, to myself, at the times when every day might not feel like a gift, which happens to all of us every once in a while. If the only obstacle is effort, then there is no obstacle. That's quite a mantra, isn't it?
Yeah, it's actually maybe another way of looking at it is I always break big problems down into small ones. It's the eating an elephant one bite at a time, that sort of thing. And that's just have always been how I've been, In the Army, when I had to run 5 miles, I would just run, and I hate to run, I would go, okay, I just have to run to that next tree, and then the next tree, and then the next tree, and then the next tree until the 5 miles are done. I always said that was my superpower. My superpower isn't being able to fly. It's not reading people's mind. My superpower was just being able to just keep working, to be that mule that's just going to keep plodding along one step. I'm never going to be the fastest, the smartest, but I'm going to get there because I'm just going to keep putting one foot in front of another. And if that's what it takes, I'm going to get there.
And if you're told that what you have to do to fly a Black Hawk is get 100 on the test and be the top in the flight school, that's what you're going to do.
But the way I did it wasn't because it was because I went at the end of the day, I flew 3 additional hours in a simulator. And I racked up more simulator hours than any other flight student. I just practice and practice and practice.
So didn't you just love that?
I'm sorry, Chris. Sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, it was a great moment. Please go ahead, Steve.
I want to get these questions in. Talk about your indomitable spirit, and that required you sometimes to speak the truth to power. And there's one moment in the book that I loved. It is when you are at Walter Reed, and an officer comes in and says, "Secretary Rumsfeld is 2 rooms away. He's going to come in to visit you, and you need to get ready." And you asked, "Is that an order?" And you were told, "No, it's not an order, but don't you want to see the secretary?" And you said, no, thank you. And the next day they sent a psychiatrist in to evaluate you.
Yeah, because they thought I was crazy.
They thought you were crazy. And I love this comment. You said to the psychiatrist, "I think my decision last night makes me the sanest person in this room."
Sir, you got to add the "sir" at the end of it.
Tell us about that, and tell us about how you squared your military service participating in a war that you fundamentally didn't believe in.
Yeah.
Because I believe in our Constitution and our democracy. I believe 100% of the primacy of the civilian population over the military. That is the strength of America's democracy, of our nation. It's why we don't have military juntas, because the civilian is, well, let me put it the other way. The military is subservient to the civilian. It is the civilian authority. It is the American people that makes these decisions, not generals. It is the civilian population that elects its elected officials. And then it is on them to debate and pass things like the authorization for use of military force. And as a soldier, I took my oath. My oath was to defend the Constitution of the United States. My oath was to carry out all lawful orders. And the American people and the Congress of the United States and the Supreme Court had said, "This man, George W. Bush, is your president." And the Congress, and maybe, I think you were there for the vote, right, Steve, had voted and on the Iraq War. And so as a soldier, even though I didn't agree with it, I believe in our Constitution. So of course I was going to go. Of course I was going to go. It wasn't, that is the whole point of our Constitution. It's sort of the same thing in the book. I talk about when I was recovering at Walter Reed, I met Dick Durbin, and there were protesters outside Walter Reed protesting the war. And every Friday, the next load of wounded from Iraq would come in, and they would have to run through this gauntlet of anti-war protesters. And a reporter asked me, well, what do you think with those protesters protesting your participation in the war? And my answer was, I thought that's what I was fighting for, their freedom to express their opinion and have that protest. I truly believe that. That's why I'm proud of my military service. There's no dichotomy here. There is no conflict. If you are a soldier and you believe in the Constitution and you believe in upholding the oath, then there was no other option for me other than to go to war.
Let me ask one final question. Then Natalie is going to give folks instructions on how to pose their questions. And then Chris, while we're queuing up, Chris will have his final question. You actually were invited to testify to the Senate about conditions at Walter Reed. Of course, Walter Reed has been consolidated with the Navy Hospital at Bethesda. You talk about the extraordinary quality of care, best medical care in the world, and yet the provisions, the treatment of families left a lot to be desired. Can you talk about that dichotomy and have things improved for families of wounded warriors?
Let me just start off by saying yes, the things have improved dramatically for the families of wounded warriors. But what happened remember, I was wounded in 2004, so that was year 2 of the war in Iraq. And remember that Donald Rumsfeld had said that we would be met with flowers and candy, and the war would be over in 2 weeks, max 3, right? So nothing. The Bush administration was not prepared for the sheer volume of war wounded who would be at Walter Reed for a long-term stay, and the number who would survive. Like I should not have survived because had I been injured even in the Persian Gulf War with my wounds, I would not have survived. The technology was so good that I actually lived. And so there were these long-term wounded warriors who were there not just for a couple of weeks, they were there for years. And so the system was just not set up for them. And what happened at Walter Reed was they ran out of room, they ran out of space. And they were having to reopen buildings that had been literally condemned. Because remember, Walter Reed was on the BRAC, was on the base closures list. And when you're on the base closures list, there are all sorts of rules, such as you can't do maintenance and you can't hire new janitors once a janitor retires because it's supposed to close the base. And in the meantime, there are all of these wounded coming in. And so even as we were getting the best healthcare possible, our family members, like my mom and my husband, had to sleep on the floor of the intensive care unit waiting room for weeks, waiting for a space to open up, and there was no room. And because I was the highest ranking amputee at Walter Reed for about 6 months or so, Brian, my husband, and I were older than most of the other patients and spouses. We ended up becoming the advocate, and that's how, I ended up testifying because our newly elected junior senator from Illinois, Barack Obama, got a committee assignment that they always give junior senators, which is the Veterans Affairs Committee. and he said, well, come testify. He thinks that things are not working well. And that's how, I got started in becoming an advocate for veterans. I was just doing my job as a soldier, really.
Just doing your job. Now our job is to read this book. And so I just want to tell people that well, actually, Natalie will give instructions on how to order the book, and then she's going to give instructions on how you can line up to ask questions, and then we'll go back to Chris. Natalie?
Great. So if everybody looks in the chat, you'll see that a couple links have been posted to order the books. We are encouraging everybody to order the book today. If you have a question for the senator, we'll be taking them both from the Q&A function where you can type in your question, or if you'd like to ask your question, you can use the raise hand function that's at the bottom of your screen, and that will let us know that you're in the queue to ask a question. So please feel free to line up with the questions. And Chris, over to you.
Well, Chris, before you go, I'm seeing these comments, Senator. Please run for president.
Oh, heck no.
No.
No. Every day's a gift. And listen, my crew who saved me are my North Star. I will never do anything that will make them regret saving my life and think, what kind of crazy thing is she doing there now? The other thing is that they are the people who are sworn to stick a broomstick through the wheels of my wheelchair. Should I ever have that crazy notion and just stop me dead in my tracks.
Well,
If they're my friends, they will stop me.
I'm just saying there's a groundswell of support for that prospect. All right, Chris, final question from you, and then we'll go to the audience.
Yeah, I have a question, which I'll get you in a second. But you know, it's funny, Steve, as you just mentioned that, it occurs to me, I can't help but notice, there is this other significant U.S. politician who I think he went to high school in Hawaii. He somehow ended up in Illinois. He might have had a seat that Senator Duckworth has. He might have even run for president. I don't think a broomstick through a wheelchair is that. I don't think that's enough. Should I continue with the comparison, Senator Duckworth, or I should stop before you hit me with the broomstick?
I'll hit you with the broomstick. No, I really love being a senator. I have so much more work that I want to do. I've tried to, in my first term, put my head down and take the job seriously and not get seduced by, all of the accoutrements and but just really do the work that the people of Illinois elected me to do. And I spent 4 years in the House under a Chairman Israel, it taught me a lot about just the basic fundamentals of legislating, and so I bring that with me to the Senate. I love my job.
And here I thought you were going to break news tonight, right now on this conversation. I'm shocked. So my last question for you, unless it turns out that no one else has any questions, in which case I've got 75 more for you. How do you explain what's going on in America today? You have a unique perspective that we've discussed, where you grew up, having lived in almost every time zone in the US. Your parents, their views, you're volunteering to serve, as you just said, despite the fact that you didn't agree with the Iraq War. You've seen citizens in Cambodia attacking each other inside a country before. What's your take as to what's going on in our country today?
I think what it is people don't feel seen. I think that on either side, people don't feel seen. I think we went through the Black Lives Matter, last summer, and I think people don't feel seen. The fact that so many Black Americans face systemic racism that exists in everything from where we locate our most polluting industries, so that we have kids in Black neighborhoods who grow up with higher levels of asthma, because that's where we put, our most polluting industries. And people don't understand that, moms have to have the talk with their sons about how to act around a police officer, in the Black community. I don't think that, the Black community feels seen. Similarly, when I go and I talk to coal miners, Illinois is a big energy state. We have more active coal miners in Illinois than there are in West Virginia, for example. When I go to talk to coal miners, they don't feel seen. They feel like, you know what, I work in a coal mine in a hole in the ground, providing the energy for this country through the 70s and the 80s. And now you spit on me because you want, a green future. What about me? How do I pay off my mortgage? How do I make sure my kids get through college? How do I get to retirement? So I think there's a real sense of people not feeling like the other side sees and not listening. And I think that there are politicians like Donald Trump who work to make that divide greater, and I think it's why I think the country breathes such a sigh of relief when Joe Biden was elected, because he's trying actively to bring us back to just at least to see one another. So when I go out across Illinois, when I was running for Senate, I went to places where they're like, who is the Asian girl from Chicago thinks she's going to get votes here in deep red Illinois? I made sure to talk to them so that they know that I see them. And I ended up getting 6% of the vote. It was 6% of the voters are Trump Duckworth voters, which is an interesting result.
There's a bumper sticker.
Yeah, I mean, people need to feel that you see them. And maybe you don't understand 100% of where they're coming from, but at least you see their struggle and their fears. And I don't think we've been as willing to listen to one another. And there have been leaders who've been leading us apart.
Thank you.
Natalie, would you recognize your questions, please?
Of course, we've got some great questions lined up. So first raised her hand was Carolyn Cox. Carolyn, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself, you've been allowed to speak and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Carolyn, are you with us? All right, maybe we'll come back to Carolyn. She may have experience a problem unmuting.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to read a question here from the chat. We have a question from Jill asking for your what we can do to help end racism that Asians and Pacific Islanders are facing. Is there any sort of any way people can get involved and people can help with this issue?
I think the first thing is to be an ally and to understand that there is a real issue, because there has been this, part of the problem has been this perception that Asian Americans are this model minority, right? That we're all doctors and accountants and lawyers, so we don't need help, that there's no racism against Asian Americans because we're not a true minority, that we don't need the help, that there's no targeting of Asians. So first, the first step is recognizing that that is not a true stereotype, that many Asian Americans struggle, that they need help. And the other is to, step forward and be that ally, be helpful. I mean, you saw the horrendous pictures, right? Video of the woman in New York who was beaten while everybody watched. We can step forward and be there for one another. I mean, my mother, during this past year has had people say nasty things to her while she was out, buying groceries, and little snide comments. And at one point she had to tell, it was actually a store worker who said something along the lines of, I have to wear this mask because of you. And she was just, and then she kept giving her a hard time throughout the store. And she finally said to the woman, I'm just here to buy grapes, lady. I'm just here to buy grapes. I'm not here to fight you. I'm just here to buy grapes for my family. We have to speak to each other's humanity and be there for one another. On the governmental level, I think that we need to have a real accounting of how many of the crimes that have involved Asian Americans actually had a racial component to it, and there are actually hate crimes as opposed to just, what they're generally classified as robberies or vandalism or harassment, because there is a race component to it that has not been recognized.
Tammy, a very important question, I think, a tough question from Sherry. Considering the thoughts that you shared about your responsibility as a soldier to upholding the Constitution, how do you reconcile those former military who were involved in the Capitol uprising on January 6th?
I can't. My feelings for that day were anger, frustration, and betrayal. The anger and frustration was to see Americans attack my own nation. I mean, they took the very flag that I wore on my uniform in combat and used that to beat Capitol Police officers. They used the American flag on a flagpole to break through those windows. And by the way, the video that you see of them coming through, the main video that you see where they're coming through and they've broken the windows and they're climbing in, I have an auxiliary office that's right next to that. I am still picking broken glass out of my keyboard. I'm still finding it everywhere. The door to that office of mine was battered, and they tried to use, I don't know what is a battering ram, but the lock held, so they never got into that office. But I'm still picking up, it was violent. It was a violent insurrection. But for the people who were either veterans or actively serving military and police officers, I feel betrayal that they have forsaken the oath that they took in exchange for an oath to what, Donald Trump, to the big lie, to something else. And it's why I'm working with Secretary Austin to try to figure out, what are we going to do to really address this extremism that has now seeped into the United States military. It's not new, but it has really grown in recent years, and we really have to address it.
Natalie, next question, please.
Thank you. It looks like, Carolyn, you've unmuted yourself. So if you want to go ahead and ask your question, that would be just fine. And then we'll go to Elizabeth Urbanski. I'm sorry, Carolyn, you just hit mute again. There you go.
There you go.
Carolyn, you with us?
I hope that you guys laughed out loud a little bit when you read this book too.
Oh, good. Well, there was so much in there. My favorite was the Rumsfeld line to the psychiatrist, I have to say, but there was some good military humor in there as well.
How about the music that Senator Duckworth chose at her wedding day? ZZ Top Legs and Pat Benatar, Hit Me With Your Best Shot.
Yeah. Well, that's not my wedding. That's I usually play that at my election night.
Oh, was that election night? It was election night. Sorry.
Yeah.
Election night. Yeah.
We have Elizabeth on for the next question.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Good evening, and thank you so much for bringing the senator to us here. Really appreciate.
Elizabeth, may I ask where you're from?
I am in Buffalo, New York.
Okay, great.
I'm a graduate student at Cornell, but I'm in Buffalo, New York. And so my question is, I am wondering, what have you found to be the most important aspect of keeping your self-esteem and policy focus while serving in Congress during what has been a really highly contentious time? What's important to you?
Yeah, I never read the comments. Never read the comments. I don't read the comments, and I don't watch video of myself. I have staff who do that, and they'll tell me, sometimes they'll force me to look at things that they're like, okay, you did good here, or boy, that was really bad, don't do that again. But I don't watch myself. I don't replay anything on myself. I don't read the comments. I just stick with what I know to be my priorities. I accept feedback from people, but I don't go into that, that rabbit's nest, that rabbit hole of following the comments, because you'll never get anything done. And again, I have my North Star. My North Star are the guys. Every day is a gift, because every day I have to. Every morning I wake up and I say a prayer of thanks for Dan and Chris and Matt and Kurt for carrying me out of that godforsaken field in Iraq. And I say a prayer of thanks for them. And that sets me up for the day. I'm never going to do anything that will make them ashamed or embarrassed of me to not make that effort worthwhile. If you read the book, you'll see that what they went through was hell. And in the book, Dan Milberg called me on the 1-year anniversary of the shoot down and said, I'd be pretty messed up, except that I know that you're doing okay. And that means a lot to me. And so, yeah, they're my North Star, and I stick with that. I stick with my oath. I stick with what I know about the Constitution, and I just don't let the other stuff get me down. Now, I do respond, as you've seen, I'll swipe back at Tucker or Carson or President, President Trump, but pretty much I just focus on what the job that needs to be done. That's what soldiers do. Don't read your own press.
Next question, Natalie.
Our next question comes from Patrick Mosquera. Patrick, if you could unmute yourself, you're allowed to ask your question.
Hi, Senator Duckworth. So my question deals with environmental justice.
Where are you from, if I may ask?
Oh yeah, I'm from Union City, New Jersey, but I'm a senior here at Cornell.
Okay.
Yeah, so my question deals with environmental justice. As you probably know, President Biden has talked a lot about, working on environmental justice initiatives. And I saw that you're also working on a lot of this. I think you're planning to reintroduce the Environmental Justice for All Act. So I'd love to know why you think now is the time to work on this issue.
Well, I think that we have been talking in the past year. I started the Environmental Justice Caucus in the Senate, me, Cory Booker, and Tom Carper. And it really came out of me going to the south side of Chicago and meeting a lot of activists. And there is you can actually do this for most of the cities. I don't know which school did the study, but you can actually Google for our major cities a map of the life expectancy overlaid over the public transportation network. So in Chicago, our subway is called the L, the elevated, right? If you go 10 stops on the L from on the red line, from the loop down to Garfield Park, the life expectancy drops by over 20 years. And that's after you take out gun violence. And it's because of lack to healthcare. It is because of lack to a clean environment. For years, we had industries that spewed pet coke into the air on the south side of Chicago. On the north side of Chicago, our beautiful beaches are closed maybe once a year due to pollutants in the water. But if you're from the south side of Chicago, they're closed on an average of 39 days a year. And so I learned about environmental justice and how, there is systemic racism in our country, and it's not just in the criminal justice system. It is in the structures of our government and how things have come about. The fact that the EPA office out of Chicago, EPA Region 5, did not have as many people assigned to monitor the air quality on the south side of Chicago as it does in Burr Ridge, which is an affluent suburb, and that the EPA under the Trump administration actually put up air monitors air monitoring equipment when there was an ethylene oxide contamination in Burr Ridge, which is a wealthy white suburb, but the city of Waukegan, which is mostly Latinx, actually had to try to borrow money to do their own air monitoring because the same EPA office wouldn't put an air monitoring system up north, in that community. Really got me working on the fact that we have real systemic racism in this country. Some of it was, was purposeful, maybe during the Jim Crow era, but a lot of it is, because we've not seen it. We've not been willing to look at it, and we have to fix that. So when we do an infrastructure investment, a bill that we're going to be doing this, we have to raise the areas, the communities that have been suffering from environmental injustice up on par with everyone else, and then fix it for everybody. And until we recognize that, we're going to have these same issues. It's why you see COVID-19 hitting communities of color with far graver consequences than other communities, because you have higher rates of asthma. If you have higher rates of asthma, you're going to be much more susceptible to a respiratory illness like COVID-19.
Natalie, let's take it looks like we have time for 2 additional questions before we begin our wrap.
Great. We have a question from Christina, who wrote in, as a mom, especially raising daughters, how do you communicate to them your positivity and your love for country, along with the reality of our polarized nation? We had quite a few questions come in about what to do with a country so polarized and how you can reach across the aisle.
I'm trying really hard to teach them. They're very young. One is 3 and one is 6. The 6-year-old is sort of getting it a little bit more, but they're children of privilege. And I'm really trying really hard to teach them not to be so materialistic. So, we go and I take them with me when we're donating to food pantries. Hunger issues are very close to my heart. So I've always volunteered at food pantries and the like. As they get older, I want to bring them in and show them that, other kids don't have what they have. So I'm trying really hard to balance it all out. But it's hard. It's hard to do. And I think you just have to give yourself the permission to maybe not be perfect about it, do the best that you can, but try to, show them their privilege more than just around Christmas and Thanksgiving, have them be active throughout the year. And I'm trying to do that. Not as successful as I would like to be, but, part of it too is for me to be able to take them overseas again. Once we start traveling, as they're getting older, I want them to see what other kids their age, do in the rest of the world. And hopefully they'll see, as I did, the way my dad taught to me, the privilege it is to be an American and the privileges that come with just being born, an accident of birth, who they are.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to take a question from Tara Goldman. Tara, if you could unmute yourself, please.
I think Tammy Duckworth is phenomenal. I am so impressed. I did not know that much about her, and I find that she is an amazing, amazing woman.
Tara, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Connecticut, and I'm a 55 graduate of Cornell.
Fantastic. What did you study, Tara?
Art history.
Wow.
I'm telling you, Senator, there's a groundswell of support. It's all starts here.
Is absolutely phenomenal.
Oh, thank you. Cornell has a program that I participated in called the Council on Teaching Indonesian. It actually leads this program where it teaches students all across the U.S. and awards a scholarship and takes you to Indonesia to become much more fluent. So you're an advanced student, you can become fluent in it. And it's really great that they do it all across the country and really spread this knowledge around the U.S. And I was really proud. That's the only way I could have gotten into Cornell. If you read the book, you'll see that I was always like, above average student, but never the one who was going to win a scholarship or be able to get into a school like Cornell. I once was in Massachusetts, and they took me on a tour of like MIT and Harvard and stuff, and I called it my tour of schools I could never have gone into.
Senator, I want to read a question that popped up, and then we'll have a few closing words. But Henry Granison writes, so do you think President Trump was afraid of you? He never replied to your comments or called you a nickname?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I think that he just couldn't come up with anything. I kept waiting for one. I was like, man, I'm going to sell so many t-shirts with that nickname on it. If he would just give me one. I was going to have all this merchandise, the way Elizabeth Warren went, with the, well, that was from Mitch McConnell, nevertheless, she persisted. I was like, they never came up with one. No, I think he's a bully. He is a bully. And when you stand up to bullies, they shrink back. And I just was not going to let him, he was bullying people. And I only responded to him when I felt like he was bullying women in the military or veterans or something. And I think when you have a legitimate platform and you're criticizing him on something legitimate, he's like most bullies, they're cowards at heart.
Before we close, I think people would really want to hear how hard you had to work to bring your daughters to the floor of the Senate. Can you? It's wonderfully written about in the book. Can you talk about that before we close?
Yeah, so it's so crazy having come from the House where Speaker Pelosi, when she was Speaker the last time, changed the rules to allow us to bring children onto the floor of the Senate of 12 and under. The Senate is so old-fashioned that it still has all sorts of crazy dress codes and stuff, and you could not bring children onto the floor of the Senate. So as soon as I got pregnant, I knew that with the votes being so evenly divided, that I was not going to be able to do a lot of things. I could not take maternity leave, because if I took maternity leave officially, I could not introduce legislation or vote. And I knew that we needed my vote. So I couldn't, so that meant I couldn't give birth back in Illinois. I had to give birth in DC so that I could be in DC and come in to vote. And I ended up coming in to vote when my baby was just 10 days old. So I knew that we were in this situation, and I started working to try to change the rules, have the Senate Rules Committee change the rules so that you could bring a baby onto the floor of the Senate. And there were all sorts, and Orrin Hatch was the chairman of the Rules Committee at the time, very distinguished, amazing career, very old-fashioned and very traditional. His first question was, what's the dress code for the baby going to be? That literally was his first question, because the Senate, you can't wear a hat, you must wear a blazer, you have to have closed-toe shoes, you have to, there are all these rules. And I was like, well, she's a baby, she'll have a beanie on, I'm not taking that off. She's going to be in footy pajamas. I don't like put shoes on her, but I will put a blazer on her if that's important. And there were all of these rules that they kept coming up with. And really, it was all about people being afraid that I was going to breastfeed on the floor. Like that's, so they, after a while, they got a Republican female senator to come to me, and she just went, Tammy, you know what this is all about, right? I said, what? I just want to be able to vote. She's like, they want to know if you're going to breastfeed on the floor. And I said, well, yeah, if the baby is hungry, I'm going to have to breastfeed her. What am I going to do? She's like, well, they just think it would be unseemly. I don't want to whip a boob out in front of these 70-year-old guys either. I'll try not to breastfeed her on the floor. I just want to vote. But it went on and on and on. The interesting thing was that I found allies unexpectedly. Marco Rubio, somebody that I have almost nothing in common with, other than that we're both senators and we both love this country very much, came up to me just out of the blue and said, Tammy, I'm going to support you. I'm going to talk to the caucus. I wish I could have brought my kids on the floor, and I'm with you all the way. And then Roy Blunt came to me, the senator from Missouri, who's a fairly conservative senator, said, Tammy, I'm going to help you. I am the next in line. As soon as I become chairman of the committee, of the Rules Committee, I will change the rules for you, and I will make sure that it happened. And he did, and he delivered, and it was a unanimous rule change. So I was able to bring my baby onto the floor.
And now she's next to you.
Now she's next to me. Okay, hang on. Sorry, everyone. Here we go.
Okay, we know you have those responsibilities. Oh, how precious, how precious.
Hello, kisses.
Oh,
There you go.
to you. I want to close with another extraordinary passage in the book, because I think it summarizes the book well. And so my way of thanking you, Senator Duckworth, is to share with the folks on this Zoom a point you make. You talk about, you did a congressional delegation, something that you and I have participated in many times, and you flew over the site where you were shot down. And you talked about how a piece of you was on that ground in that place. And you joked with the crew saying, you know, did you see a boot? Did you see my boot or my leg? And when they brought you back, they gave you a boot. They said, we couldn't find yours, but here's one, and they signed it. And you talk about that boot hangs, or it's on a shelf in the office, your office in the Senate. And you say, it serves to remind me that, well, now I have to actually put light on this. It serves as a reminder that no matter how grievous the wound, healing is always possible, and that the lowest moments can lead to the greatest heights. It reminds me that every day is indeed a gift. Senator Duckworth, this book really is a gift, and I want to thank you for writing it. Chris, a quick closing comment from you, and then we'll let the senator be a parent.
You don't go on once the kid enters the frame and blows kisses. It's like, good night. Good night, Senator Duckworth. That was awesome.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Susan Page about her book, Madam Speaker, Nancy Pelosi and the Lessons of Power. May 19th, a conversation with former Ambassador Bill Richardson. www.12books.com. Get this book. It is phenomenal. Senator, thank you. We're honored by your presence. Bye, everybody.